Elizabeth, just confirming that you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, good. Good calling. Come on in, come on in.
Hey, John. Can I send that over? Nice to say. Yes. Well, that's you. You right here. Well, that's you. It's nice seating. Like last time, except you were, you and I were over there. Yeah. I was walking over here to say hi. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Big breath of bubble from it. You're probably for next. Bruce, they want us to sign in over there, and then there's an official agenda and all that stuff on that table against the wall. Okay.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
I see something recommend you sunglasses hat on, you know, incognito.
Oh, you look at light.
Really? Okay.
That, I figured, yeah. We're turning it so.
Oh, yeah.
You're gonna support that.
Okay.
Mission.
And,
Everybody too. So here. Oh, wow. Is that because of the pandemic? Yeah. Yeah, she never knows. Said.
Annette is a former student of Molly Luncheon. I don't know if he ever took.
45 minutes.
I don't remember. I think he did, but I was on his exam and he was a PhD student on his dissertation. So I haven't seen him in a long time.
Yeah. What's that all you
Sure he was. Now I know. Now I know.
Peter, did you right?
Yeah.
Huh?
No, he,
Yeah. My young guys, I work with my switches and closing things on the walls. I'm sure that's water. Yeah, I hate that.
You know what?
That's part of that collection.
Pardon me, sir. You said you were gonna give us a clue about where the water was.
Yeah, just straight out here. Oh, look, in your little break room.
Yeah, they don't register. They don't know. It's open.
Because it's strong.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming.
Hey, Matt, USIBWC? Yeah, I was just talking about,
There's an agenda here, I wanted to grab it.
oh, here. And then we're gonna be doing with AT&T.
Just past 10 years in that class, there.
And are you based here?
I am. Yeah, I've been down there, Southern Regional. Trying to get. There's a lot of white, there's a lot of.
Okay, in the interest of time and to be respectful of everybody's time and the speakers that are going to be presenting today, we're going to go ahead and get started. I just would like to confirm there was a slight change from the agenda that was posted online to the one that's out here. There was a small change, and all I did was add a board discussion bullet that had been left off accidentally on the initial agenda. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay. So I wanted to welcome everybody to the Southeast Arizona Citizens Forum, being held in person today at Pima County's beautiful water conference center. Thank you very much for the use of your facilities. My name, for those of you that may not know me, is Leslie Grijalva. I'm a public affairs specialist with the U.S. section of the International Boundary and Water Commission. I am based out of headquarters in El Paso, Texas. I wanted to just go over a few housekeeping items. If for those of us attending in person, if anybody needs to use the restrooms, they're right out the doors behind us over here to our right when you walk out, as well as a water fountain.
Break room right here, we'll have water, ice, and cups. If you take a left out of this door or a right out of this door, you'll see systems and a drinking fountain.
Yes. If you have joined us via Teams, you should be able to see the PowerPoint the agenda and the PowerPoints that are going to be projected on the screen. If you've called in via telephone and you can't see them on Teams for any reason, we have posted the presentations on our webpage, so they are now available for viewing if you need to pull them up that way. Okay. If Teams isn't working for you, you have the option of calling in by phone and viewing the presentations on the webpage. If you needed to call in, I have the number, which the call-in number is 1-872-240-1286. The meeting, the passcode that it will prompt you for is 644-86-1278 and the pound sign. And it will ask you for a meeting ID all of this will be available again online. You could see the meeting ID there. It's a lot of numbers, so. Okay. Today's meeting is going to be co-chaired by our area operations manager from the Nogales field office, Mr. John Light. So I'm going to hand it over to John for introduction.
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for coming out. We'd like to start this off with a pledge of allegiance. So. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we'd like to start with introduction of the board members. Do you want to start with the online board members?
We can. Can the board members that are joining us online introduce themselves? Your name, your affiliation, and what you're interested in, please. Hi, Brian. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Brian Vandervoot. I'm a resident of Tubac from Santa Cruz County. This is the second meeting that I've been able to participate in. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend physically due to some extensive travel plans commencing tomorrow. I'm looking forward to learning a whole lot more during this meeting. Thank you.
Tim, how about you?
Hi, this is Tim Grother. I'm a neighbor of Brian's, as a matter of fact, and I had a little trouble getting my computer going here. Sorry about being late. And I also apologize for missing the last meeting. I have been used to these starting at 4 o'clock, and it started early, and I signed in right after the meeting closed up, so I missed that one, but I'm looking forward to this one.
Don't see Ben online. Is there any other board member attending virtually?
So let's start with the present board members. Simon, can you start?
My name is Simon Rivera. I'm with the Pima County Wastewater Department. I manage the engineering division.
Okay. And again, my name is John Light. I'm co-chair with Ben Lumley for the Citizens Forum. I'm the area operations manager for USIBWC Nogales field office. I've been in the area for 30 plus years and with the agency for a few decades. So, Bruce?
I'm Bruce Bracker. I'm a Santa Cruz County supervisor. I think this is my second term on this board, or maybe more. But it's always been a great place to get information and share what's going on in our community. We greatly appreciate that IBWC does this.
So I'm John Cumbo. This is my second term. I think the first term was 3 years as it ended up. I also am a resident of Tubac. I am now the chairperson of a small domestic water improvement district as well.
Keith Dennis, Executive Director for Southeastern Arizona Governments Organization. We're the Rural Council of Governments for Santa Cruz, Cochise, Graham, and Greenlee County. So that's 2 of the 4 border counties in Arizona. And second meeting, first term. Happy to be here, and for all the things that the previous 2 board members said. Appreciate the opportunity to learn some things.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Mark Taylor, Westland Resources, and also CAP Board of Directors. And I guess it's my 3rd term, and glad to be back. So looking forward to hearing Sharon today. One of my interests is anything with transporter, water issues, and wastewater issues.
Thanks, Mark.
I'm was worked by Western Light at the Nogales Center. I'm always worked at the top.
Joaquin Marujo with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality.
Sunday. Review the county wastewater manager of water campus here in our compliance regulatory affairs office. So just participating in conversation today.
Sharon Mendel, Director of the Water Resources Research Center at the University of Arizona. I'll speak in just a moment.
Matt Henry, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality.
Fantastic. We really appreciate everybody coming out tonight in this room and online. We have a lot of very experienced people, a lot of people in different fields. And it gives us the opportunity to discuss a lot of different issues with different perspectives and learn from each other and come up with better and greater ideas for solving issues and just learning in general about different things. I especially want to thank Albert. He's been reassigned from headquarters to the field office to help me out. So that's a big help. He's now a resident of Puerto Rico. So thank you, Albert, for coming down. That's a big help for me. Okay, so our first presenter tonight is Dr. Sharon Middow. She's the director of the Water Resource Research Center at the University of Arizona. And she is going to be doing a presentation on the status of TAP.
Yeah, and I think if it's okay with everybody, I'm just gonna sit here because I can see all of you, see the clock.
Can I just confirm, can anybody who's attending virtually confirm that you can see the presentation?
I am not seeing it yet, Leslie.
Give me 1 second.
Nor am I.
Can you hear us okay?
There, now it's appeared.
Okay. No.
Then I think it'll go away here because I don't see the red border.
There is a.
There's a red border.
Oh, my eyes.
Okay.
We can see the presentation, yes? Online attendees?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Can they hear us okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Take it away, Dr.
All
Miller.
right, so thank you for inviting me to give you an update. We've given various, and I say we deliberately given updates over various points in time about the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program. And sometimes a USGS person's been doing it, sometimes I or somebody from the university has been doing it. And we're actually a very busy little program as a little program. My presentation is, I kind of always know how many slides I have because I numbered them and all told it's 16 slides. But I want to mention that throughout it, I have QR codes, I have web links, because anything I talk about in terms of a report, a paper, a publication, I want anybody who might want to access it to be able to access it. So I think all the links are working, I checked. And I also include links to the Water Resources Research Center. Some of you know who we are, but some of you may not. We're a 60-year-old center now. We're celebrating our 60th anniversary. We're the federally authorized Water Resources Research Institute for Arizona. We're part of a national network. The one in Texas is at Texas A&M. The one in New Mexico is at New Mexico State. We're all different. But that federal status is actually important to why we're a partner in the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program. This emanated from federal legislation that was approved way back in 2006. I'll talk in a few minutes about pending legislation that we have in Congress now to reauthorize and modify a little bit. But I've actually been involved in this since 2006. It's scary to say, but I was invited to testify on the authorizing legislation by Congressman Jim Colby, who many of you would remember in the room. He was the main House sponsor of the bill in the House side, and on the Senate side, it was Senators Bingaman and as the lead, and then John was co-sponsor. So it goes all the way back to 2016, and so I know a lot of the history, and I'm not going to focus on that. but I refer to it at times. And I just realized for the benefit of this group, I didn't include certain maps because we've sometimes been using the maps for such a long time that I didn't want to keep including the same map. So again, there are places to find things online, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. And so that authorizing legislation that was approved in 2006 and signed by President Bush in December of 2006 established this transboundary aquifer assessment program. It established priority aquifers for Arizona's northern border, two being the Santa Cruz and the San Pedro. And it also established the Waco Bolson and the Mesilla as the priority aquifers for the Texas-New Mexico portion of the border. And that was somebody.
Can all the meeting participants attending virtually mute your mics, please? I'm not the organizer. I can't mute them.
Okay, well, hopefully the person muted.
There we go.
And the priority aquifers were really designated based on where there was a lot of pumping going on and a lot of economic activity. We know there are a lot of aquifers along the border, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And so that was in 2006, but it wasn't really until 2009 that this got going as a binational program. And I do a lot of writing. I mean, I am an academician. Somebody recently, and I thought it was a compliment, called me a pracademic because I really interface with the real world, very practically oriented. And so in addition to writing journal articles, which I'll show some screenshots of the titles of those, I write these reflections essays. I used to write a public policy column. And so that reflections on the 10th anniversary of the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program was actually penned in 2019. And so it's like, well, wait, we just said it started in 2006, but it really didn't emerge as a binational program of the US and Mexico through the International Boundary and Water Commission until 2009. And so we had that authorizing legislation way back in 2006, and all that really did was say that the Secretary of the Interior through the USGS was authorized to carry out a program, but to really do a transboundary binational program, you've got to have the other partner connected to it. And that's really what happened in 2009, when the joint cooperative process document was signed, as shown there by Principal Engineer and Antonio Rasconi, who's still there, and John Marie, I think was that one? Yeah. Who was the principal engineer at the US section at that time. And I just want to mention that some of what you'll hear me talk about a little bit is not only about the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program and groundwater, but just also generally about water at the border, including Colorado River water. You know, for 12 years, I served on the CAP board through 2020 and have had interactions with the commissioners and with the USIBWC, not only on the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program. And I put up this reflections on April 4th only because a lot of things really got pushed forward in a positive way out of the earthquake that happened on Easter, April 4th, 2010. This was April 4th, 2021, that Easter was again on April 4th. That's my birthday. And so it's kind of a special day to me that I always remember that. And so again, I talked about the earthquake and actually the good things in terms of binational collaboration that emerged from that. Okay, so I mentioned this joint report. It's you know, they say it's a terrible thing when you make a presentation to say something, I don't expect you to read it, but I really don't expect you to read it. Why I put this up there was for the point of it being, it's a 3-page document. It's 3 pages in English, of course, 3 pages in Spanish. And the reason that's important is that it's really an eloquent document. It sets out the framework for how we're going to go about the binational transboundary assessment. We'll respect the sovereignty of each of the countries. We're going to agree on what aquifers we're going to work on. We're going to do it collaboratively. It sets out some other principles, but it also says nothing's going to require the other country to do anything. And it really doesn't get into the issue of management, which I'll come back to later on. It's about assessment. It's about characterizing groundwater and aquifer. And getting on the same page, so to speak, so that you don't have maps that for the US end at the southern border and for Mexico and at the northern border, which was typically what would happen when you were looking at characterizations and modeling of groundwater. So again, this is just some of the history of being there to authorize it, about that cooperative framework, how it really is an eloquent framework and a model. There's a lot of national dialogue, which I'll say, I mean, international dialogue, which I'll say something about toward the end, that what we're doing at our border in a binational way is really exemplary, but it's sometimes kind of a secret. And things like the Guarani aquifer, which is huge in South America, and a small aquifer shared by Switzerland and France get a lot of attention, but we're doing really a great job of working together to do this, do these analyses. And then I just want to show, and I mentioned to John, like that was the flower I took. A group of us together went, had a meeting across the states involved on the US side, hosted at my water center. And then we went down the next day and included some USGS people from headquarters. We went down and got a tour of the treatment plant. And Albert, you were there that day, weren't you? Yeah, I thought so. And so that was just the picture that I took there. I mentioned some of the things later on. And then just in terms of bringing it to the current, this is a reflections that I wrote and published in November of 2023, based on my testimony that I gave to Congress on reauthorization legislation that has been introduced by Representative Ciscalani and co-sponsored by Representative Melanie Stansbury from New Mexico. She's out of the Albuquerque area, and it's a bipartisan piece of legislation. I was invited to testify. It actually, I think because it's bipartisan, it's actually been voted out of the House Natural Resources Committee. Whether it'll go anywhere or not remains to be seen. And again, I provide links, and the testimony is an attachment to the first page of that reflection. If anybody wants to read it, the website also has my responses to questions, because in a few minutes, I can't get into some of the, I can't say everything I want to say about the program, and there's a lot more background there. That map over there, I am glad I have that map in there, is one we've used a lot over many years that shows those four transboundary aquifers that have been the ones established for study to date. Okay, so what have we done? And this is kind of a new group for this, as you talked about your terms. And so some of you may have heard some of this before. And I did bring copies of this. I want to pass those around, and I have some more. Our group working along the border on the San Pedro study, and the group includes representatives from the University of Arizona, from the University of Sonora, from the U.S. Geological Survey, and Canagua in Mexico, all facilitated through the International Boundary Water Commission, USIBWC. And together we worked on a report on the San Pedro. It was published in late 2016. It's fully bilingual. It's one document, you flip it over, it's one language in the other direction, it's the other language. And that bulletin I'm sending around is the 6-pager we put out, also in English and Spanish. And why I circled those logos is it's rare to find this collection of logos on things, that you have the IBWC accepting a report as a binational report that goes on its website and so forth, that you have the USGS's logo on that, because the USGS, nothing gets with their logo if it hasn't gone through peer review and multiple levels of peer review. And then you have the two, Conagua from Mexico, and then the two universities partnering. And so that, if you take a look at that, and Art, did it get around? Because I do have some more, if you need some more to get around to the other side. Happy to pass those around. I wasn't sure how many.
We had enough.
We've been in the room.
Oh, you did get it? Okay, good. But if you open it up, you'll see, an example of kind of before and after mapping, where you have different units of measurement, you have different ways of collecting data, and trying to harmonize the data and information was a huge undertaking. And in fact, the person who did much of the mapping, sorry, Matt, as you want here, right next to me, was a master's student originally at the University of Sonora. She came to the university and studied under me and some others to get her PhD, is now back at the University of Sonora as a professor there, Elia Tapia. And so this was no minor undertaking. We have been working, Mr. Combo, he sends emails every month or so to Gilbert and Naya, IBWC staff, and CCs me. So what is the status of the Santa Cruz study? Because we started that very soon after this was completed. And so I anticipated the question, I reached out to Gilbert, so what's the story? All of the chapters except chapter 7, which is the challenging chapter, have been reviewed by Conagua, and it's a matter of finalizing. The chapter 7 is the geology chapter, and that's still being worked on. And so hopefully, he said the next meeting after the one coming up, so 2 meetings down, maybe it'll be done. We'll see. I think we need to have a party, John, when it's done, because this has been going on for a very, very long time. But that's just one of the activities, and it's an important one, I should say, yes. It's very important because it's binational. It's being done collaboratively, and that's no small feat. The other kind of area region, the Texas, New Mexico, Chihuahua portion of it, they haven't had the as good working relationship as we have had here. So they look to us, the Arizona Sonora team, as kind of the example of how working together, the mutual respect, sometimes the patience and so forth, working together binationally. But there's been a lot of other work going on. And so Dr. Anne Marie Mathern, who's with the U.S. Geological Survey in New Mexico, and I guest edited a special issue of the journal, and we called it Advances in Transboundary Aquifer Assessment, and then got put together as a book. And we have many papers in there from all across the border, and not only people involved in the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program. And here are some of the studies, particularly about our region. And so Elia, one of her thesis chapters really looked at what was going on globally and how that cooperative framework was a model and consistent with what the UN water folks and UNESCO indicate should be principles followed for transboundary aquifer work. We looked at the assessing groundwater withdrawal sustainability in the Mexican portion of the transboundary Santa Cruz aquifer. Because one of the things that has been a little challenging is because of some bad experiences over in the Texas, New Mexico, Chihuahua portion. At one point, Mexico said, well, we do our work on our side, you do your work on your side, funding this. But then the funding hasn't necessarily been there to do that. So we've actually relaxed that a little bit to get work done. A review of climate change impacts on the U.S.-Mexico transboundary Santa Cruz River Basin. And that's taken a look at some of the climate models, and we've done some work over years, and I say we. I'm not the technical one. I'm kind of like the diplomat of this whole thing, of trying to see that we're staying on track and so forth and moving forward. But the point is, we know we're getting hotter, and we know that precipitation patterns are changing. And so some of this looks at different scenarios and what do things look like for water balance in the area. And I'm sorry about that, I didn't turn the ringer off. And, you know, it's not looking good. I mean, it's not looking good. We know we get some recharge, some good recharge in the micro basins. But if you look overall, the water balance is looking, you know, to be moving in a negative direction. And then there's some work that was also done by nationally. So these are all papers, they're all freely online. If anybody wants to go find them, all you have to do is go to that page and you'll see a listing of all the articles. They're all open access, which means that there isn't a paywall that you have to pay to access that. That's really important. So one of the things that we worked on starting in probably 2022 was coming together across the states in the US, working at the state water science centers of USGS, working with the 3 water institutes at New Mexico State, Texas A&M, and California opted out of participating. So California back in 2006 said, we don't want to be part of this. So that's why they're not part of this to date. And we came together and said, okay, what would we do over a 5-year period? So we can answer the question, what would you do with more money? What would you do over time? And so we came up with a joint 5-year strategic plan. It's still called draft because we wanted to share it with Mexico, incorporate any feedback we got from Mexico, and we have got some feedback. But these are the 5 main tasks. And there's lots of more detail to it. But if you just look at those 5, stakeholder engagement and capacity building. And we all realize that, and I'll show you a table in a minute or so on the funding we've had, that, you know, we get very connected to our science and the work we're doing, and we don't often have the wherewithal, the time, the resources to do extensive stakeholder engagement, which is why we very much value coming to this group and being able to talk about it. To look at the socioeconomic context, government and policy, it's not only the physical aspects of aquifers and water quality and so forth that really determine the usability and use of aquifers, but you also need to look at the economic activity, socioeconomic and so forth. To look at the concept of a binational groundwater atlas, something that would have data, be online, visualized and so forth, to prioritize aquifers. Because since 2006, the efforts have mostly, not totally focused on those 4 aquifers. Well, where do we go next if we want to go next? You know, we know there's lots of work to be done. What kind of process should we use? Involving stakeholders to prioritize aquifers. And then the hydrologic studies. I mean, it's number 5, but fundamentally that's critical. If you looked at what might have been envisioned when it was first passed, let me see, this is my next, okay. I'll say one thing and then I'll talk about some of what was envisioned and the money. Through discussions with, something got moved. My arrows got moved, Leslie, I think when you converted it. So I was very good about the arrows, and this, I think was my only animation. But the arrows should have gone through, and maybe I made a mistake. Maybe it got missed and I didn't. What they like, it should have been numbers 3 and 5, my fault, because I had to do that. The Mexican partners are very interested in working on the binational groundwater atlas, and maybe Leslie, I can fix that and send you
Of course.
posting a revised. Yeah, that's my fault. And then hydrologic studies. And so that's what they've indicated they prioritize. They have very limited funding to no funding to work on this. So the question is, okay, that's really what the hydrologic studies, what was envisioned to be an important part of this. That needs to be done with significant funding over a period of time. And instead, we're getting at best annual funding of limited amounts that we can't count on. The Mexico currently is getting enough funding. So I summarize that at the end. But I put in red this concept of binational modeling being the versus single country modeling of transboundary aquifer. There's been a lot of modeling done of transboundary aquifer. But a lot of that modeling is done by a single side, a single entity. And the whole point of this is to be doing it together. So we're doing binational modeling of the transboundary aquifer, not just modeling transboundary aquifer, but modeling it together. And that's really the goal here. The work that we're doing, I wanted to bring it a little bit to the WRC level. The team is small. Elliot works for us as a consultant, as does Evan Shamir, who's a consultant out of California. And he's been working with us for several years. And these are the kinds of things that we're working on, but I'm mindful of time. I mentioned the reauthorization legislation. This is a very small bill. What it does is it extends the period of authorization. The original authorization was for 10 years, so it expired, but you can still get federal funding. With that expiration, it authorized $50 million for over that 10-year idea of significant sizable funding. I'm gonna go forward. This is the total through fiscal year 23 that the whole program has gotten. My water center has gotten 1/6 of that. Each yearly amount, it gets split 6 ways. 3 offices at USGS and the 3 university institutes. 10 million out of a $50 million authorization over a 15-year period. Not a lot of funding. I'm very proud that we've done a lot with the funding we've had. People are figuring out ways to put their time into this and the like. But this reauthorization legislation, and again, I'm giving you the links where you can find that, would extend the period of authorization, the $50 million authorized limit, but it also makes it a very important change for Arizona. And we're very, very interested in this change. When the original legislation was going through, there was and there remains concern that we shouldn't mess with, Mark, you could appreciate this, we shouldn't mess in the Colorado River border area where groundwater is figured in to some extent with the surface water management. So at the time, the way they stopped us from doing that was just saying, you're only going to be working on those 2 aquifers and you won't have any more priority aquifers. Where Texas and New Mexico could go through a process and establish more priority aquifers. We want to get rid of that restriction, leave the restriction on the Yuma Basin in, but take out, the rest of the border from the restriction. So if there was interested in Naco, or if there was interested in this place or that place, we're not barred from doing that through funding through this legislation. And the Department of Water Resources Central Arizona project, they're fine if you just don't include the Yuma Basin. I can make an argument, I'm not sure that's the best thing, but I'm happy with that. And so that change in that restriction is in that legislation. So just very quickly, and I'm almost done, that some complementary efforts. I stated earlier that this transboundary aquifer assessment program is about it's about characterization. It's about coming to a common understanding of the circumstances. It's not designed to be prescriptive or even offer options of management. But that's the big question. So where do you go? There's a lot of dependence on groundwater. Some of these border communities are basically 100% dependent on groundwater. So where do you go with that? So a group of us have come together as an informal binational groundwater working group. The work's not funded by the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program. And we've been looking at questions about how might you reach a groundwater agreement along the border. And so we've had two recent publications. We've talked some with the commissioners about this. And there's a binational forum that we're gonna do a coffee break on this in April. So again, these are short little papers. The first one was presented at an international groundwater conference. And the second one was kind of a follow-on to that. And those are binational groups of people working on that. And then also, I just want to mention that this is a publication that's coming out, but there's a handbook on water diplomacy. And I ended up writing a case study about the US-Mexico border because if somebody else ended up not being able to write it, we would have had nothing in there. So I don't mention the IBWC there by name. I just say factors that contribute to successful diplomatic outcomes. Case study of the Colorado River Basin Cross-Boundary Institution. Well, that's IBWC. And there's 7 factors that I highlight in the article, and this first one, you might think of, well, that's obvious, a functioning cooperative mechanism. But many places, there's no mechanism, or there may be something on paper that doesn't actually function. And if you look at IBWC, it really is a model of how you can function by having, you know, a kind of equivalent or set up on both sides of the border and all that. And then these other things you might say, well, that's obvious, but sometimes you have to write the obvious. There's somebody who actually reviewed the paper, you know, it wasn't a blind review. And he came back and he said, well, I'd love you to talk about the meeting with your partners, because I think that's really important. And I've never had anything to cite about that. So somebody could actually cite the importance of getting to know and meeting with your partners, because I say it in there. It's coming out sometime soon. And then also just mentioning, these are issues of importance globally, and it's really nice if we have things we can point to in our region that actually can help other regions and some lessons learned. And there's a 10th World Water Forum being held in May in Bali. I think Commissioner Hanair is going to that. We talked about that in Sauter just a few weeks ago. And I get my airline ticket purchased and so forth. I'm gonna be going as well and talking to some of these things. So in summary, just some of the opportunities and challenges. There's a real desire to work binationally. We develop good relations, and it could be just at a university level, but it really is more at agency level as well. A greater recognition of the role of groundwater, which some of us may think, well, of course groundwater is important. That's the sole source for our area. But globally, there tends to be a focus on surface water, seen more easily, and groundwater is seen as a buffer for times of climate change as opposed to the main source. And increased stakeholder engagement. There's opportunity to do more than we have. Challenges funding. It's been inconsistent across the country. There was a time when Mexico had money and we did not. And then we've had some funding and they've not. The funding's been inconsistent over time in both level of predictability. And then coordinating schedules is, it just takes a while to get a binational meeting going. And one of the things we like to do going forward is that middle picture up there. That was a binational workshop that we held in November 2009. If you saw that signature of the joint cooperative framework, that was August 2009. We very quickly followed with the binational workshop. We really didn't know exactly who should be there or not, but the whole idea was to come up with kind of a scope of topics, not a scope of work like a contract, but what things do people want to look at? And what we'd like to do is do that again. We'd like to have a binational workshop, bring in stakeholders, both sides. And so we're trying to set up a meeting, Gilbert Anaya's trying to set up a meeting sometime in early May to get the partners together to agree on the binational workshop so that we can work on actually setting up an agenda, finding a location. This was held actually at the Desert Diamond Casino near the airport, near Tucson Airport. We do a lot of meetings down in Nogales and Rio Rico when Rio Rico Resort was operating. And it tends to be easier to do on our side because of the government people sometimes having USGS having a bit more of a problem going to south of the border. But we do like to eat together. This one on the left was taken June, the afternoon after we visited the plant. We had a meeting and a number of some faculty and students from the University of Sonora came up. So that's it. Overall, if you really want to get into some of the technical aspects, we can come back. We can have Elon Shamir or Elliot talk about these things, but this gives you kind of an update on what we've been up to and what we're hoping to do.
Do we have any questions from the board members? Go ahead.
Yes, can we back up like 3 slides? I got 5 out of the 7 of your fact.
Oh,
Yeah, I just was too slow.
2, 4, 6.
Back one.
Oh, wait,
There it is.
Leadership fell off.
Oh, yeah, that's a
And for the
mistake.
last time this week I'm working on this. I have to tell you, I'm a little bit tired. We had our annual conference last week and Sunday, I mean, I worked all day Sunday and I was working on this. And I first had 6 and then I counted, and no, it's 7, the leadership got off. So I can fix my slides, Leslie, and
Okay.
get them.
We'll get it posted.
So, functioning cooperative mechanism, mutual respect contributing to trust. Really, really important. And this goes beyond, this is like not just binational. This is indigenous, anything, you gotta respect each other. You gotta have involvement of the parties, you gotta communicate. Persistence and patience are not the same thing, but you kind of have to have both, right? You gotta be persistent and you gotta be patient while you're being persistent. Eating with your partners and then leadership. Last, and I even thought this, certainly not leads is leadership. And we've seen that with the IBWC, and we see that in successful examples of collaboration and cooperation.
Well, thank you. I got all 7 now. And this,
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I will fix that. I know I wrote it. I don't know what happened, but it disappeared.
as they're useful in probably a variety of settings, right? Not just this particular one.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, well, sure, I was curious with, the results of, the studies you've done here. What kind of policy changes have you seen in Mexico, maybe through Conagua or others that came out of the studies that you have?
I didn't say that we've seen policy changes on either side of the border. That's what remains to be seen. And, just like on the US side, you have changes in administration, you have changes in viewpoints. I will share, my perception is that on the Mexican side, there's a big interest in groundwater. And a desire to take a look at it, and look at a new paradigm for managing groundwater, which I've talked about in Mexico City, and we have the opportunity, but translating kind of what you think you ought to do into actual actions. One of the things we learned on the Mexican side is that they really don't measure groundwater use. They have their concessions and their amounts that people are allowed to pump for their permits, but they don't have the kind of reporting that, let's say, the Santa Cruz AMA does as an active management area of groundwater use. And so sometimes part of what we learned is it's hard to get the data, but I would say it's like what's going on in the state of Arizona right now with rural groundwater basins. I mean, if you're over pumping, over drafting, you don't even know how much you may be overdrafting in some instances. And you're in an area where it's not being replenished at anywhere near the rate of the overdraft. It deserves a careful look to figure out what you ought to do.
So is a study like instigated, more data gathering on either side of the border?
Well, yes, certainly some of it. That's why we want to have this workshop, because we want to help prioritize what additional things people want information on that we can get and put together. And then I think these other discussions of what I call complementary efforts, those need to be, led or occur with the policymakers and decision makers. I keep saying to some people, they say, well, what is all this about? If you can't get on the same page with the status of your aquifer and groundwater, it's going to be very hard to figure out how you might manage it jointly. But it is a hard task, I think, to figure out how to manage it jointly because of the different layers of government and the differences across the border. Mexico, it's all centralized. On our side, it's not. The states don't want the feds involved, but it's at the border. The feds have to be involved, right? And so there's a lot of everything coming together. Some of us think, Mark, that Colorado River Water Users Conference needs to have more discussion of groundwater because it's not all about the surface water. And so we got to have everybody kind of in the room together talking about it.
Any other questions from the board? Anybody from?
Yeah.
John?
Once the Santa Cruz River Aquifer study is finally finished, do you envision having a meeting? I'll start on the US side, with yourself, USGS, USIBWC, maybe Natalie Maston comes down from, Phoenix. Someone from ADEQ. Maybe you have Alejandro Barcenas represent the city of Nogales, Arizona. And figure out, were there any surprises? Do you need to extend, if law was no problem, can you extend or do you need to extend the boundary of the schema? Do you need to change what's in the AMA, the fifth management plan? I mean, there's no ability to change that right now, but, so I just don't know your thoughts.
Well, we did go to Sierra Vista after this report was done and had a presentation. Ben was there, among others. And Supervisor Bracker and I had a conversation back in October, because not only is this going on, but we have county fact sheets that we've been releasing. We just released the Santa Cruz County fact sheet.
Right.
So we would welcome the opportunity in multiple ways to go down. With ADQ, I've interfaced in a kind of behind the scenes way on some of that. But when the Border 2025 meeting was held, and what did I have, a few minutes to say something, 5 minutes or something like that?
5 minutes.
And I was online, I wasn't there, whatever. But I mean, there's such significant opportunity and cause for getting together and talking about these things. We don't want them to be secret. It's just a matter of figuring out the right time, sometimes getting the invitation. I mean, I appreciate the invitation here, sometimes getting the invitation. But, I think it would behoove us to get that report done so that we can release it and talk about it. And your question about surprises is a really good one.
Any other questions? Do we have any questions from anybody online? Oh, sorry.
Why everybody's muted online?
No, they should. I don't have any on the chat though. Go ahead.
How would you like to see this data used? What kind of changes? What kind of visioning? You've done a lot of work pulling this stuff together. Where do we take it? What do we do with it?
Well, I think we have to get together and look at it and say, okay, what is it saying? All right, what it's saying is, groundwater is being depleted, but maybe at a more rapid rate than it has in the past. We also know that we have the discharges from the treatment plant that are going, downstream to the north that are doing some recharge. And I personally think, but it's not so much what I think. I think it's presented and see what the locals think. That this is useful to understanding what's happening to the groundwater that the communities are depending upon. There is also water quality, there's geology, there's other stuff in there. And then it's to maybe say, hey, this is something we need to be concerned about, or there's been a discrete change in something compared to what we thought. But I think we need to present it. I think it's really, to all of you and the agency people, we've worked with using the Arizona Department of Water Resources groundwater models and so forth. So it's not that they're unaware of this, but they're not directly involved. And so the idea of workshop, of bringing people together, I think that's what we need to do. And then it's up to the locals to kind of interpret, to ask the questions, and then determine, okay, is there some additional study that they want? We have been dependent. You get into a little bit of a catch-22 when you have a federally authorized program, because if you go apply for other funds, they will sometimes say, well, you've got this federal program. What do you need to, they don't need NSF funding, or they don't need NOAA funding. Some of our work started with the NOAA grant that we got before the Transboundary Aquifer Assessment Program got going, where we had some of the basic work that was done looking at some of the microbasins between the border and the international treatment plant. Some of the stuff needs to be updated. I'm worried that the Santa Cruz aquifer study's taken so long, we need to take a data update, exercise to update it. So, you know, again, I'm very proud. I think we've done great work, but it would be helpful if there were a more consistent effort and we knew, like now with the current budget, I'm pretty sure it's been zeroed out again. And so we don't know if we're getting the funding. And then part of the reason to work with Mexico is I can use some of my funding to send down to Mexico if they match it. We have a process through IBWC to do that. But that's where the communication across the border helps and having timely meetings. Because if we don't hear from them what they would like to do specifically, I gotta spend my money, otherwise I won't get the next year. So it's, you know, there are internal challenges, but I think the basic answer to all these questions is get the stuff out there, get people talking about it, and then see if you can help prioritize some work effort for us consistent with that, you know, 5-year program, which I think is very broad.
When you present your information, what kind of a time frame do you need? Do you think it's a 30-minute conversation? Do you think it's an hour conversation?
I would say we
What kind of a
probably
setting?
need a half day at least.
A
I
half
think it's
day?
a workshop. I think it's a
Okay.
workshop. I mean, we could come in front of the board of supervisors and say, okay, here's this and that, but if you really want to get into it, I think it's a workshop. I think it's hours we're talking
The
about.
board of supervisors spiel would be leading to a workshop,
Yeah.
building up to something.
However much you give us, and I'm mindful, you know, even this overview, it's like, okay, that took 30 minutes or more. But we'll keep to that. But if people really want to get into, okay, show me the study, show me what you did, you gotta give the scientists and the researchers some time to do that.
People I just talked.
Here I got one last question about PFAS or really any, are you showing trends? Like, are you showing like 10, 20, 30-year trends, a change in water quality or volumes or anything else in the report? And maybe in particular, I was thinking about PFAS or any change in.
Yeah, you know, I don't know the answer because I haven't been following the details of the Santa Cruz report. It's whatever data have been out there, and PFAS has only been something that's really been kind of reported on more recently. So I don't know, maybe you, from Santa Cruz County know the extent to which PFAS are you, from ADQ or UMass.
Yes.
And actually, I was thinking on the Mexico side, if there's.
Yeah, you know,
any testing in
Mexico's been a bit more hesitant to talk about water quality. They've been more interested in talking about water quantity.
Mexico.
So we gotta look at, is that your experience as well?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I don't think we're gonna get that much there, but you know, you mentioned Alejandro, you know, if you get the Mapas people and Alejandro, and you get down to the municipal level people, that also could be helpful, because right now, you know, we've had limited interaction with the, Sonoran, you know, agency and so forth, so it's complicated. If, you know, I hate to say, like, but if we had more resources, we could have more people and we could do more, you know, we're resource constrained, and we're working with the USGS, and so, and Mexico, and that's determined a lot of what our priorities are. I'll just say with this, I once worked in the Department of Interior with a collaborator from Texas. And we were asked a question by, I think we were with the international person, the main person from the Department of Interior. And said, well, what would you like from this? And the other person with me said, $5 million a year, because it's $50 million over 10 years authorization. And I said, predictable funding over time. Because it's hard to undertake a binational model if you don't have some predictable funding over time to get it done. And so I still would say that.
It could be number 8.
Yeah. You could probably populate that with a lot more on the list.
You talked about earlier in Mexico, they monitor much more closely what they take out of the ground than what we do.
No, they less.
Less?
Yeah, they don't measure the withdrawals, the pumping. What they have there, and I forget, it's the concessions and the other thing, the permits, and some of it's for private and some of it's for public, and I forget the two, I always forget that, the two companion words. They quantify what the legal limits are, but they don't actually measure to see, and John Light here is nodding his head, people, but they don't measure like on an annual basis what the withdrawals are.
For the withdrawals for public use or withdrawals?
I think in general, my understanding is in general. And that's something, you know, Elia or anyone could talk about, because they're the ones who've been looking at the data, but you're seeming surprised, but that's what I learned to be the case.
It's interesting because I was under the assumption from the people that we know in agriculture, they're very restricted on what they use with water. And it's very expensive. It's, you know.
And it may be because their concessions or whatever, their permitted volumes are low,
Mhm.
and they do worry about that. It's not that they don't have restrictions on, you know, on paper on what the use could be, but to measure compliance with that, my understanding is that the data are not
Interesting.
regularly collected.
Because if you go into the agriculture regions, you're seeing in Mexico, much more water efficient technology distribution systems than you've ever seen in the United States. And we're just starting to talk about that in the state of Arizona. In Mexico, they've been using it for 15, 20 years. So that's why I always thought that Mexico was very strict on their.
So that maybe their permitted volumes are low, and it may be it's so expensive to use the water. I mean, you have to look at all the factors that determine it.
Interesting conversation to move forward.
Yeah. And I just want to be careful, you know, I'm explaining my understanding the best. That's why you need to have a workshop. You need to have a group of experts, a group of people who know better than I do as one person, picking a lot of it up through osmosis from the work of others.
Sure.
Any additional questions before we move on to our second presentation? Dr. Mendel, thank you very much for your.
Yeah.
very informative.
I wanted to extend an invitation, to Dr. Mendel, we've got an open invitation to the Citizens Forum Board for in the future, for anything to just reach out to myself or to Leslie, and we're there, we'll definitely
Yes, appreciate that.
be on
Appreciate
there.
that. And I'll convey that to the team, including the USGS team. I don't know if any of them are watching. I'll let them know about the.
Right.
Yes. Anytime that you'd like to put any information out, we're happy to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, our next presenter is,
John,
yes,
before you move forward, my apologies for the interruption. I was listening. This is Rosanna Gavaldon, Arizona State Senator, for Legislative District 21. And Dr. Magdal, I just want to bring to the attention that Governor Hobbs has started the Arizona-Mexico Commission, and they do have a committee to address environment and water. And so that's a suggestion to you moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gavaldon, for mentioning that. And I know that the other half is on that board now, Mr. Arturo.
Yes.
And we have
Yes.
presented in the past there. Years ago, we even presented one time in Rocky Point in Puerto Penasco. But we haven't been there in a long time, and I had thought about that actively today. So we'd love to figure out how to interface with that committee. Thank you for bringing that up.
Wonderful. Director Bushowski is actually one of the co-chairs. And so if you need any assistance with that, Dr. Magdal, please don't hesitate to reach out to my office. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
okay.
Go ahead.
Our next presenter is Matt Ryder. He's a senior hydrogeologist at the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. And he's going to be giving us an update on elements related to PFAS.
Do I stand up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you about PFAS. This kind of been a lot of what I do recently. So I can touch on the question of PFAS and a little bit of history and timeline. Some of it has to do with just being more recent in general. Some of it is in terms of sampling, kind of lowering of detection limits and things like that in recent past. But yeah, PFAS in Arizona, and I wanted to touch a little bit on what ADQ has been doing, particularly recently. I think a lot of people are pretty familiar at this point with PFAS, or at least a lot of people have heard kind of the nickname forever chemicals. It's been out there in the news quite a bit. But I just give just a couple of quick brief slides on background. So PFAS is an acronym, PFAS. It's for polyfluoroalkyl substances, which is obviously referring to more than one chemical. So a lot of people use PFAS with like a particular contaminant. We're really talking about a group of contaminants, in reality, up to thousands of chemicals, depending on your definition. I've got an example one here. This is a really common one. This is PFOA, so sort of an acronym within the acronym. But this is one I'll talk about here in one of the slides. And the general characters are, the biggest characteristic PFAS share is really that the carbon-fluorine bond there. And it's an extremely strong bond. It's what makes these chemicals really difficult to break down. So they don't break down well in the environment. They don't break down easily in our bodies. They're difficult to break down when we're trying to break them down, like in a remediation setting. And that's really where that nickname comes from, the forever chemicals. They tend to stick around for a long time in the environment and in our bodies and so on. And I've got a little bit of a kind of figure here just showing sort of the life cycle, if you will, of PFAS. So this is a structure of a common one. Like I said, they can have variations on this molecule with branching and linear and different functional heads, but these are some of the more common ones, or this is one of the more common ones. So you see that functional head. So there's a functional head down here, then a long chain with this carbon-fluorine bond, and this chain can vary. Most of the ones that I'll talk about today and the common ones that you'll see like being proposed for regulation sort of have this similar structure. It's really a functional head and then this chain. And that structure makes them really good for a lot of really useful properties, water resistance, stain resistance, heat resistance, and that's what made them really popular for a whole range of products. So you can see, we kind of start with industry, and they've been used in a lot of consumer products for those reasons. So things like food containers and water resistant, stain resistant clothing. And they've also been used, this is an important one here, particularly in Arizona and a lot of places, and it's AFFF, so that's aqueous film forming foam. It's a firefighting foam. It's really, really good at putting out liquid fuel fires. So it was used, it's been used for like jet fuel fires, so at airports and military bases. And we have major issues with this at a lot of the military bases here in Arizona and across the country, particularly the Air Force is dealing with this at force bases across the country. So, whether it's consumer products or AFFF, it can get into the environment, get into our waste infrastructure. So it's getting into our wastewater treatment plants, simply in our landfills, and that can in turn get into the environment again. And whether it's through the environment or consumer products, there could be exposures, human exposure that's PFAS in drinking water or directly from using consumer products. Of course, exposure is not that big of a deal unless there's also a health concern. So as we know now, the reason that we're here, we're talking about this right now, is that PFAS has been linked to a range of negative health impacts. And I'm not a toxicologist, so I'm not going to go into this in detail. But I just want to use this slide to point out that the effects are really based on the length of exposure, essentially, and the concentration. So how long have you been exposed and to how much? It seems pretty obvious and straightforward. But really what I'm getting at is I'm going to show a lot of post-regulation, really low numbers and low concentrations. But it's important to keep in mind that those numbers are based on lifetime exposure. So we're not talking about something like E. coli in drinking water. You're exposed to that one time. There can be major health implications, obviously. Here, we're really talking about, when we're talking about the numbers I'm going to talk about, it's lifetime exposures. And so, yeah, so here are some of the numbers. This is a little bit of a timeline of where EPA has been with their health advisories. So it was around the year 2000 where the health implications really kind of started to become more widely known. EPA started working with industry groups to phase out the use of some of the more common PFAS. So this is that same molecule. But this is PFOA. PFOS was the other kind of most widely used and widespread PFAS. And so those started to become phased out in the early 2000s. By 2009, EPA had come out with provisional health advisories for these two. So the provisional health advisories were 400 and 200 parts per trillion. And so parts per trillion, just unit of concentration. If anybody's not familiar, it's a really, really small number. Usually when we're talking about contaminants, we're talking about parts per billion or parts per million, which is 1,000 times, each one of those is 1,000 times greater than a part per trillion. The equivalent of the thing that's commonly used out there is that it's a single drop in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So you can get your head even around what that looks like. It's a really, really tiny concentration. So even though this is 400, 200, it's in parts per trillion, and all of these numbers on here are parts per trillion. So they're small numbers. In 2016, and this gets a little bit to the timeline question, this is about the time where there started to become, I think, a lot more focused on environmental impacts with PFAS. And so a lot more sampling is being done here, started to be a lot of investigations at the military bases. And in 2016, EPA lowered the health advisory to 70 parts per trillion. And they did it as by the reason it's sort of oddly formatted there is they did it in a combined concentration. So either individually or combined for PFOA and PFOS at 70 parts per trillion. So we had that 70 parts per trillion number for a while, and then in 2022, EPA revised it lower again. This time you can see those really, really low numbers. You can convert those to parts per quadrillion, which again, if you can get your head around that, it's 4 parts per quadrillion and 20 parts per quadrillion for PFOA and PFOS respectively. They also added 2 compounds, PFBS and what's commonly referred to as JAX chemicals. Those were essentially replacements as they phased out PFOA and PFOS. Those were 2 of the main replacements for those chemicals. And so EPA came out with health advisories for those as well, which were still very low numbers, but much higher than what you're seeing there for PFOA and PFOS. Health advisory, just to throw a definition out there, it's purposefully a very, very conservative number. So it's meant to look at potential exposure over a lifetime. It's meant to essentially be the concentration below which no negative health impacts at all are expected for sensitive populations, for sensitive time periods, again, over a lifetime. So it's a very, very conservative number. It's not legally enforceable. It's not enforceable for drinking water providers or for any other purpose. And so there is as yet no enforceable limits on PFAS at a national level or here in Arizona. So we're waiting on the federal government to finalize their limits for PFAS. They have, however, proposed legally enforceable limits, set an absolute contaminant limit, and that would be legally enforceable for drinking water providers. They cannot provide drinking water that exceeds these limits. So for PFOA and PFOS, it's 4 parts per trillion. So higher than that lifetime health advisory. An MCL takes into account different factors. So it's got to take into account, for example, practicality. Can you even measure this? So that's about the limit. That 4 parts per trillion is about the limit of what we can measure today. That 4 parts per quadrillion we couldn't possibly measure down that low with the technology that we have. And then, of course, the practicality of actually being able to remove that from drinking water. So there's some, like I said, other factors that go into it. They also came out with what's called a hazard index, which essentially looks at the mixture of these additional 4 compounds. So you got your PFBS and JAX chemicals in there, which had the health advisories. They also added 2 additional PFAS there, so PFHXS and PFNA. And I'll show you real quick. I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but I just kind of wanted to show that this is how you calculate it, and the denominators, they essentially sort of act as MCL. So they're kind of the limits that you can compare to. So just like we were comparing, PFOA that you might detect in a drinking water source at 4 parts per trillion, you can compare these other individual components to their, what they call health-based water concentrations. If any one, you can sort of see by this calculation, just stepping back, if any one of the concentrations, so the blue would be like the concentration you would detect. If any one of those is above what's in the red below, then that hazard index value is going to be greater than 1. So Gen X, if it's 11, you're already greater than 1 right there. So you would be above now, or the hazard index. So that's, yeah.
On the slide before, how many municipal drinking systems in southern Arizona would have issues with this?
Yeah, can you give me about
It's
5
coming up?
slides.
Okay.
I'm gonna show graphs, yeah. I'll just show you the numbers here in a second. Because we have been doing that sampling. We've got some numbers at this point, some good numbers. So real quick, I'll just run through a couple of these. So that's the proposed regulation under the Safe Drinking Water Act, those are the MCL. That was proposed last March. We're expecting it could be any day now. They had originally come out and said by the end of 2023. That's obviously been delayed, but we're hearing it could be anytime now, essentially. So we're waiting on that. But that's not the only thing EPA is doing. There's proposed regulations under a number of different federal acts. So you've got CERCLA, which is essentially your cleanup Superfund, and that's looking at cleanup of hazardous waste releases. There's a proposed hazardous substance designation that's been out for a while. That's another one that we're kind of waiting on. That would give EPA the authority to create Superfund sites based on PFAS. Also under the Clean Water Act, there's been draft aquatic life criteria out for quite a while now. We're waiting for those to be finalized. And then RIPRA, which is your, governing your disposal of solid waste and hazardous waste. Just recently, actually, just at the end of January, kind of beginning of February, the EPA put out proposed regulation under RIPRA. So a number of things that we're waiting for, a number of things we're preparing for. And we kind of had to look at the approach we're going to take in this time period where there's a lot of proposed regulation out there. We don't know what the final regulation is going to look like. We don't know the timing of the final regulation. And so as an agency, we've been really focusing our efforts on healthy drinking water first and foremost. So going out and collecting and analyzing the data, so I'll get to that data here in just a second. Advocating for bringing additional resources here into Arizona. And we're already working with water providers on assistance for beginning to meet what we expect to be the regulations here coming soon. Another big piece. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a quick question, kind of like looking beyond water, and that's just one part of our exposure. And, I know you said they started making changes back in 2000. How have they looked at, and do they look at exposure to clothing or to other food substances or other, potential exposures? Has that been looked at altogether along with the water? And I was curious if they're having the same type of very tough regulations on all these other potential exposures and took that into account.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is being looked at. Other states have been looking at it. Other states have been looking to ban PFAS for different uses. It's difficult to do because PFAS are used in so many different products that are really important. FDA is looking at certain things. There was just an announcement recently about FDA restricting use of PFAS in food products. So it is being looked at, and certain states have different rules on that. The drinking water regulations, they actually take into account. So those regulations, or the proposed regulations, those proposed concentration are actually lower because they are considering the fact that we are exposed in other ways as well, that drinking water is in our sole source of exposure. So it is being taken into account as we go through these things.
And that's kind of where I was going with it. I was thinking, well, if we're still being exposed through plasticware and clothes and other areas that, it's kind of like the deal with, maybe we're getting so much exposure through these other things, and then we're spending a huge amount of money for treating our water system.
Yeah.
And 99.9% of exposures to other areas, are they really balancing the exposure and the cost?
So it's a great question. So one thing I'd say to keep in mind is that that's a really good question, and I think something that needs to be taken into account when we're talking about this. One thing to keep in mind is because PFAS, we use that term, but we're really talking about different things. Some of the most widespread exposures right now are to things like PFOA and PFOS, and those have been phased out of most products, particularly here in the US. So there's been some health studies showing, these compounds are in 99% of people's blood and we're exposed to all these different things. But there's been some health studies showing that the concentrations of, say, PFOA and PFOS in people's blood have been coming down as they've been getting these out of products. The exposure in things like drinking water becomes much more of our exposure than it used to be. So it becomes more of an important thing to make sure that we're not, drinking water with those compounds. And as you saw, the different compounds, they've got different proposed concentrations for regulatory. Part of that is their different toxicities. So as those chains, I showed you that one, that's PFOA, that's an 8 chain. And PFOA and PFOS both have 8 carbons, which are fully fluorinated. And a lot of the replacements are shorter chains. And even though they still have, they still have their own toxicities, a lot of times they're much higher because of the different structures. So there's a lot of complication, and yeah, it makes it difficult. But I think it gets to this, this next point, which I'm saying, I have here as an agency, we're looking at making sure that we're taking a balanced approach to this. Because there's lots of different factors when it comes into it. And PFAS isn't the only thing, that there's exposures to, and it's not, there's a lot of really important things we do as an agency to protect human health and the environment here in Arizona. So we want to make sure that, we just don't turn, all of our focus and attention over here and let other things slip. So a couple of things that we're doing in terms of making sure we're kind of taking this balanced approach. One thing is we've got a lot of funding. And that takes resources to apply and use that funding. A lot of the funding is earmarked specifically for PFAS. And so we're looking at opportunities where that PFAS funding can be used to tackle multiple problems at once. So an example might be a drinking water system that's been dealing with another contaminant, nitrate, arsenic, or something like that. Now it's a PFAS issue. But in many cases, we can use the PFAS funding to come in and help that system come into compliance with both things at once, or build resiliency within the system, or increase their technical capacity, those kind of things. So the hope there is that, we're not just, sort of narrowly focused on PFAS. Hey, we've got a lot of money, that's great. Let's just look at PFAS. We're trying to keep this holistic approach. And then the third piece I have, there's community engagement. We're really focused on being out in the community. People are seeing this in the news. They've got lots of questions. We're trying to do outreach where we can. We've been focused on putting a lot of resources on the webpage. My direct line is there on our webpage. We've got a number of other folks that have their direct lines there. So people can call, they can ask questions, they can email us and get some answers.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
In your comments, you talked about using PFAS in food product. Is that an additive?
You know what? Just spoke there. I apologize. Thank you for catching me on that.
Okay.
It's what I meant was in like food packaging. So yeah, wrappers and things like that. Thank you for catching me on that.
No, thank you.
Don't want to speak on.
We were getting way in the weeds, but you terrified me.
Yeah, thank you.
But
It's easier.
they're measuring it in parts per trillion.
Yeah.
All you really need is just this tiniest bit of residue off your plastic packaging and you're over the limit, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no limits on PFAS in the food right now, but there have been studies done where they've sampled food products and they see it, and it's primarily from the packaging, where they're seeing it in the food.
Surrounded.
Yeah.
The sensitive thing.
So, I want to get into what ADQ's been doing here. We've taken a number of actions already. So yeah, we're still waiting on regulation at the federal level, but there's a number of things we're doing in the meantime. So going back a number of years, we've started this kind of targeted statewide screening to try and better understand what the impacts are here in Arizona, help us prepare for these regulations that are coming. So we've looked at things like drinking water, groundwater, wastewater, and biosolids, and I'll show you some of these results. I promise I'm getting to them. We did have an take back and replace pilot program that ran in 2023. That was a really great program. I don't have info on that here, but we worked with fire departments to essentially take back their PFAS containing firefighting phones and give them PFAS free alternatives. So that was a great program. And then we've expanded the drinking water testing from the original target screen that we did. That's what I'll talk about here to show you some of the results. So our program has sort of expanded upon what EPA is already doing through what they call their unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. We call that UCMR. There's been 5 of them so far, and they essentially require these larger systems that are serving more than 300 people. They require those systems to sample for unregulated contaminants, to understand what's in their water, and to provide that information to their customers. So PFAS was actually included in UCMR 3, and it's included now in UCMR 5 as well. And there's an expanded suite of PFAS that are being sampled this time around. So they're in the process of that right now, and we're getting that data. But the vast majority of systems in Arizona are actually smaller than 3,300 people. So that's a significant gap in looking at our data. So we've been out there sampling those systems, the ones that are supposed to be regulated but fall below that 3,300 threshold. There's more than 700 of those systems, and we've been out sampling those. It's free testing for the systems. We're going out and doing the testing. We're providing them the results, giving them a head start on getting prepared, allowing their customers to be informed about what's in their groundwater. So it's a really great program. We're about 90% of the way through, and here's the data. So I think this is really interesting because what I get a lot when I talk about this, or when I hear other people talk, especially, I hear a lot of PFAS are everywhere. They're just everywhere. We detect them everywhere, and anywhere you go look for them, you're gonna find them. But these are our results for small systems in Arizona. You see the vast majority of this is over 80% of those systems in our program had no detections of these PFAS that are supposed to be regulated. It's really that 11% mark. So that's, you do the math there with about 700 systems at 11%. We're looking at a little over 70 systems that would potentially would be over the MCL if it were finalized as it stands, as it's proposed today.
That's the 4 parts per trillion, right?
Yes, it's 4 parts for PFOA and PFOS, and that's that hazard index calculation as well. So that takes into account all of them. So if it was finalized today as is proposed, this is the situation we're looking at. Like I said, we're over 90%, and the rest of the system, some of them are kind of hesitant to sample and things like that. So we're working at that last 10%, but this is a pretty good picture of what's going on throughout the state. I'll show you here real quick the UCMR 5 sampling results. So these are still coming in. You can see we're less than 50% for the systems reported right now, but it's somewhat similar results. It's a smaller sample size. The numbers are a little bit different, but again, the majority of the systems had no detections, but that does leave us with a sizable portion where we're going to be working with them on prepping for these federal regulations.
Matt?
Yep.
My understanding is that the places where it's been identified, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, they're doing a lot of water cleanup and reinjecting it back into the aquifers and doing that kind of work.
Getting there.
We're getting there, okay.
Right now, we're in a lot of investigation phase on this.
What do water systems that have this PFAS in their drinking water system, not trying to deal with a plume, but it's distributed, does everything have to go through a microfilter before it goes out to the public?
Yeah, well, so we're working on them on what the solutions are gonna be. Ideally, so treatment is, it's a big deal. It's expensive, and we have funding. I'll kind of explain it in a few minutes, but we have this funding that will help with capital costs. But of course, capital costs, it's only gonna get you so far. You gotta maintain the system, you gotta have the technical capability to be running this treatment system. It's more expensive in the long run, it's difficult. So the priority is finding different solutions, right? Can you turn a well off? Do you have access to another well that's maybe, can you modify a well or deepen it? Can you connect with a system that has other resources? So there's all these questions that we're kind of looking at potential solutions. Treatment, it's definitely out there an option. Universities are working every day on, not just universities, but companies. Obviously, this is a big deal. There's lots of money going into potential solutions, particularly on the treatment side. So those treatment options are out there. We have, technologies that we've always used, like ion exchange and activated carbon that we use for other contaminants do work for PFAS, but it's expensive. These are really low concentrations, so it's a little bit of a different paradigm than we're used to with a lot of other contaminants. So, in short, it's very complicated, and we're kind of working on a system by system basis to figure out what the solutions are. This is the map we've got on our website. I guess this is, maybe it has some animation that there we go. I'll go back for a second. So, we've got all this information essentially on the map. We've got the UCMR3 data I talked about, and then our targeted sampling, and those are in the gray, and then the blue dots there is our most recent sampling. We're working to get that UCMR data on, the new UCMR data on as quick as we can. But you can click on these. Anybody can go to this azbq.gov/mycommunity. There's lots of maps sort of similar to this that'll show, you know, what's around potential environmental issues, you know, in your community where you live. This is the PFAS map, so you can click on it and you can see there's those 6 PFAS that are supposed to be regulated. You can see what the concentrations are in a particular well. So this is out there available to the public. And then this is what I was talking about before, where, you know, we've got quite a bit of funding. We're starting to work with these systems. So at the current, we have $42 million that's available through the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's earmarked for PFAS and for small and disadvantaged communities. Then we have an additional $5 million in funding that was included in the governor's budgets last year, and came to us from the state. And so we're using both of those sources of funding to start working with communities already on potential solutions. We're working to prioritize those. As you can imagine, there's quite a bit of systems that we're working with, and we sort of have to take it in pieces to some degree. So we're looking at the magnitude of impacts. Do they have a disadvantaged population? Are there those co-contaminants where we can really kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Those are some of the things that we're looking at when we're looking at prioritization here, trying to do it as quickly as we can. And then particularly for this group here, I just wanted to touch real quick. That was the drinking water side. I mentioned that we've done targeted sampling of other media as well. So I want to quickly touch on the effluent biosolids study. So I just have a couple of slides on this. The sampling was originally conducted in June 2022, and then some resampling was done in February 2023 at wastewater treatment plants kind of throughout the state. So this map sort of shows the distribution. The International Wastewater Treatment Plant was included in this list. This is just a real quick summary here of some of the results. So these are the effluent results, the biosolids results. We had 38 total effluent samples, and almost every single one of them had detections of PFAS. In terms of like average concentration, 167 parts per trillion. Now that's the total. So I didn't mention there that these are 40. This particular method we were using to sample takes into account or analyzes for 40 PFAS compounds. So this is the addition of all 40. So it's not like looking just at PFOA or PFOS. So you see 167 parts per trillion. And then for the biosolids, it's a different unit altogether. But I put this here actually to compare against the next slide, which is results here of the wastewater treatment plant boundary balance. Lots of numbers on here, but I'll just point out a couple of quick things. So we did sample at the IOI and at the influence of the plant, and the effluents, and of course biosolids. Pretty much, you know, these numbers are fairly similar in terms of what's coming in and what's coming into the plants, out of the plants. That's very typical. In fact, sometimes we actually see more coming out of the plants because there's some precursors and other things in the influent water that can be transformed. But the basic thing to know is that there's a lot of complicated chemistry going on in these plants. So we can get different results in terms of influent and effluent. Here we're seeing pretty much very similar results. And then down here, I just wanted, you know, to be able to compare those numbers back to the averages. You kind of see, like this is the effluent, that number back there was 167. Here in the Dallas, 105. So it's very similar, kind of in that same range. Biosolids is a little bit higher. It was 60 on the last slide. And so we're a little bit higher here, but nothing, you know, it's not a major outlier in terms of the results. And I'll just finish up here in terms of looking forward. And so, you know, we're still maintaining that focus on looking at drinking water. We know that these federal regulations are coming. We don't exactly know the timing. We don't exactly know what they're going to say in their final form. But we're getting ready to incorporate those into our existing programs. And then, of course, we'll be reevaluating our approach to this as these continue to be finalized. And we're expecting developments here for probably years to come for the defense. So, That's really all I had. These are some contacts. I think this is out there and available, so, it's just, there's my contact information, some of our grants coordinators there, and some, links to our website. So, thank you. I really appreciate your time. Appreciate being able to come and talk to you a little bit about what we're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Leslie, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So do you, I may have missed it. It's kind of hard to hear on the Zoom a little bit, but have you looked into what kind of treatment technologies will be required for wastewater treatment plants, if any? And any idea of what those costs might be to the general public that will be paying the rates that fund those wastewater treatment facilities, including the International Boundary Plant down in Nogales, for example? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. Really, we have not looked into that yet. So we're really kind of early in the process of just understanding what's out there. And I don't know that I mentioned it, but I just want to emphasize, you know, that's a single sample result that I was showing there. So really, we don't have big data over time and lots of results. So things are kind of real early in that process, and whether there would need to be treatments. Like I said, there's a lot of research going on in these areas, including wastewater treatment and looking at that complicated chemistry within these plants. So I think it's just a little bit early from ADQ's perspective in terms of trying to do that analysis.
Okay, so in my experience has been in Colorado for 30 years. And in Colorado, I know they're struggling with the same issue as they are across the country, I'm sure. And I know that they have been dealing with this pretty extensively on the wastewater treatment side, and that there are very significant costs associated with removal of PFAS from wastewater treatment effluent. So just to be aware, I think that's important for all of us as citizens to be aware of the future impact of those costs.
Can I hop on that? I think for effluent discharge into a WOTUS, and, you know, let's consider the IBWC and discharge into Santa Cruz and all that. I'm pretty sure the surface water quality standards and the proposed aquatic wildlife standards are in the part per million range. We're talking about part per trillion discharge. So when we go to APP, look at Aquifer Protection Program and look at aquifer point of compliance, then you're going back to that part per trillion because you're assuming that aquifer is going to be delivered for human consumption at some point. But unless something changes with EPA's designation of what they want those standards to be, and then of course the designation that water is classified for, the use is classified for, which I don't know off the top of my head what that reach is classified for down there. But I think there's gonna be a little bit more wiggle room than 4 parts per trillion on the surface water discharge, but we'll have to see.
Yep, very good point. Everything you said is very accurate. So, yeah, those, I didn't go into what those aquatic life standards were, but they are much higher in terms of just looking at those.
For now.
For now, yeah. Well, and they're not finally, they're just proposed.
You had some dollars up there and I just was waiting for the end. Jaime and I have been trying to figure out where this $33.5 million project that got funded, I think, for Tucson Water, I'm not sure, is gonna be and what actually is it gonna do? So I don't know if you know, can speak to that.
Yeah, I can't really speak to the specifics. I think maybe are you talking, they're like in the northwest portion of their service area on those wells? It was announced, I think.
I forget when, I can't remember who in the administration announced that they were getting 33.5 million. It was gonna go, I thought in Midtown somewhere, and it was a, new potential treatment area.
Yeah.
And I just don't know where it was.
Advanced participation plan. Do you know where they were getting some money for?
So it could be, I think what he's talking about is something different.
Okay.
But I probably shouldn't speak directly to that. I do
That's a
know.
question for Tucson.
Yeah, it's a question for Tucson Water. I do know that there's several different things. ADQ is actually working with the city on the advanced oxidation plan and providing some PFAS pre-treatment there. So there's lots of things that are going on, lots of different money
How about if I ask this way?
Sure.
Where is ADQ or the city of Tucson? Where are they treating for PFAS right now?
In Tucson? Or
In this region?
in the southern region?
Sure.
Okay, because there's lots of different things going on, lots of different pieces. I'll start in Tucson. So got a couple of things. So Davis Mountain Air Force Base, I don't know if anyone's heard of our central Tucson PFAS project. So a number of years ago, it's around 2020. Essentially, we were seeing high concentrations coming basically at the northern edge of Davis Mountain Air Force Base, and Davis Mountain was doing an investigation on base. But Tucson Water essentially came to us and said, oh, hey, these are really high concentrations coming and moving toward a central well field. And so ADQ provided funding from our state superfund site, our state superfund program. And we did an investigation there, kind of characterized the plume that appears to be coming off base, and installed a treatment system. So we're still running that treatment system. I'm actually the project manager for that treatment system. We're calling it a demonstration treatment system at the moment. It's pulling in high concentrations and treating it down there right near the edge of Davis Mountain Air Force Base. The city of Tucson is working on sort of an extension of that project where they're looking to install treatments kind of at the end of the plume to prevent that plume from spreading any farther. So we're looking at kind of pulling out the higher concentrations nearer to the source. They're going out to the edge of the plume to prevent that from impacting additional. So Davis Mountain, that's kind of one area. The big area is Tucson Airport, that Michael mentioned. They've got a big remediation system there. We've got really high concentrations of PFAS, the highest in the state, at a number of areas down there around the airport. They have a treatment system there. That's a federal superfund site for TPE, different contaminant. PFAS, it's a little bit different. There's some different source dynamics going on there. But essentially, the majority of the the PFAS plume is kind of headed toward that treatment system. And that's where I'm saying ADQ is working with the city there to help put in some PFAS treatment. So we provided $25 million in funding down there to help them put in the PFAS treatment. Then I am aware, and again, don't want to speak to it about Tucson Water, but I'm aware that they've secured some funding to do some additional treatments in other areas of their system to make sure that they can treat and serve the water where they need to. So I'll think for a second. I think that pretty much covers kind of the Tucson area.
And is the treated water then released to perk into the aquifer, or is it injected back into the aquifer? Or is it just used?
So Davis Mountain Air Force Base, the treated water is being released to a wash for the moment. That's kind of a temporary solution. And so that's integrated back in the aquifer at Superfund site. So that water had been being released to the Santa Cruz. They still have the ability to put some or all of the water into the Santa Cruz, but they've also recently been connected to the recycled water system. So the treated water is being treated there and then put into the recycled water system.
Thank you.
Yep.
Has there been any thought on, for example, wastewater treatment plants are collecting everyone's water and in turn is reflecting that in past presence? If there was a limitation on the F1 for a treatment plant, would there be funding available to implement a cleanup process that I guess it was collecting everybody's process because into this single water collection and then release it to their
So it's a great question. I think, again, we're maybe early, we don't exactly know what those limits would even look like, if there will be limits, what they'll be, what the federal regulations are going to be. So I think it's something on our radar in terms of wastewater treatment plants here in Arizona and impacts to them. But definitely, I think a little too early for us to be identifying funding or anything like that. That's my wish.
Do we have any questions from any of the virtual attendees? Thank you, Matt, for that.
Thank you.
And at this point, we'd like to open up for public comment. Leslie, can you explain that?
There was no public comment submitted in advance, but it's open now if anybody would like to make public comment from anybody present here physically or virtually.
No. If not, we'll move on to board discussion. Is there any items that the board would like to discuss?
Yeah, I can, I didn't know Matt was gonna even present till last Wednesday, so I had to apologize to him in advance, but, in late January, I was trying to figure out PFAS, what was happening in Mexico, et cetera. And so I sent a note to EPA back east. Back east said, hey, go look on this other part of our website. And so I did, and I found somebody that I sent a note to, and I said, you know, I live basically down there on Los Nogales and Santa Cruz River Aquifer, et cetera. And, you know, I have some questions about, you know, what's Mexico doing? Are they stopping PFAS? Is it going to be the same limits as the US? What testing protocols, et cetera? Are you EPA going to monitor for PFAS in Southern Arizona? Yeah, I didn't know if they were going to do that. Are they going to monitor for any inflows from Mexico into the US? And is anything being discussed by EPA with Mexico regarding the PFAS? And do you know what they're going to do? So I ended up sending this to someone where I hit the jackpot because this person is the acting manager of the Mexico border branch for Region 9. And so she copies, I didn't know Joaquin was going to be here. So she copies Joaquin, and Joaquin says, I'm going to forward this over to Matt. And so I think about an hour later, I hit the jackpot again. So I can't say enough good things about Ms. Banos, that's her name now, Ellie Banos, from who's the acting border manager for Region 9. And he didn't pay me to say this, but I can't say enough good things about Matt. Because Matt said he's working with water providers down in this area, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, we're doing some testing and we're trying to work with water providers. And if you have any other questions, send them to me. I'm just referring to my speaker's notes. So I asked him, are you going to do any testing of the IOI or OSO wash? And so my apologies to Matt and Joaquin, because this is an email chain that is being copied to the same people that Ellie sent it to. And I said, in a perfect world, I'd like to isolate Nogales, Sonora, Nogales, Arizona. And Matt said, they don't have any plans to test the IOI or OSO wash. They haven't really tried to identify the PFAS sources in that region. And before we have the final federal rules, Matt said, we need to focus on sampling drinking water. Anyway, I said, well, do you guys use, and I'm thinking ahead, cross border, you guys use the same testing method and limits as Cal EPA, as NMED, as I think they call them TCEQ at Texas. And Matt said, well, we use the same sampling methods that EPA developed. Other states may be different. And he said, we don't have our own limits currently in Arizona, but the other states have state-specific limits. So I'm thinking to myself, if you're trying to exchange data with Mexico, it'd be kind of nice to be somewhat close when you're submitting your data, but as long as you're submitting the actual results, that would be fine. I asked if ADEQ knew what was happening in Mexico, what testing limits, what kind of things. Matt said they weren't aware yet. And I asked if there was any plans to test the Santa Cruz River as it flows south into Mexico. And again, he said, we don't have any plans to sample surface water. We're really focused on sampling groundwater. And we've not had any discussions with USIBWC or EPA about testing from the headwaters into Mexico and also from south of the border back into the ground, back north. And then I asked him, are you going to test San Pedro as it flows north as it crosses the border? And he said, no, don't have any plans, but I can tell you there have been no no PFAS detected in the groundwater sample, in the drinking water samples that have been taken there. And then I said, are you going to test anything as it flows into Metro Tucson? He said, no, we're not going to test anything above, but you heard his report. He said, we've been doing a lot of testing and other people have been testing. So that kind of stopped the shared email exchange. And I sent Matt a separate note saying, if he didn't know this, you know, there's a unique goal that the SCAMA has that no other no other AMA has in Arizona. And that is to make sure there's, no long-term declines in the local water tables, because groundwater and surface water are so closely interrelated in SCAMA that I wanted him to make sure that he knew that. And he said, thanks for telling me. I mean, he may have already known, but that's just the way he responded. And, but he said, they are evaluating whether water sampling at the surface level would help them do a better job of choosing where drinking water might be a better place to have a drinking water supply. And then I also let him know about separately the Hermosa project, because not from a contaminant standpoint, but just from a water movement standpoint. And I think I understated it because I said, I think there's going to be 5 million gallons a day that move from the Hermosa project and find its way into the Santa Cruz River through Harshaw Creek and Sonoyta Creek and the Santa Cruz River. So that stopped the conversation I had with Matt, and I was looking around and I found that there is a Commission for Environmental Cooperation. I didn't know anything about it, but they said this commission was formed by the governments of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So I'm poking around figuring I'm not going to bother Michael Regan, who's the EPA administrator, who's the head guy. I'm trying to figure out who to send notes about what's going on with Mexico. What are they doing and what are we doing with Mexico? And so I sent Ms. Banos a note. She very nicely sent me something back and introduced me to Leslie Dangalat. And Leslie is the senior advisor for North America for EPA's Office of International and Tribal Affairs. And she oversees all the work we do with Canada, Mexico, US-Mexico border program, and the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. And she said, well, Mexico right now is focused on complying with Stockholm and Montreal, because some PFAS are in refrigerants, some have been banned. The CEC, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, is looking into reporting PFAS under what they call, I'm looking, pollutant release and transfer registry. So it can be included in their taking stock report. And I actually went in there and looked at taking stock, and I'm sure Matt can understand it, but there was a lot there. And then she pointed me to a link where CEC had just published or had a publication regarding the migration potential of PFAS from documents. So based on that, I didn't want to, my question wasn't on PFAS, but my thought would be that whether this is probably a USIBWC issue, that you would test IOI and Neoso wash. But not just for PFAS, this would be normal. And I think Ben and Brian tested OSO wash the last time they were there, generally speaking. I think that was back in November. And I would test the Santa Cruz River as it crosses into Mexico and as it comes back. Because I want to look at Mexico, say, hey, nobody asked me to do this. I'm just good natured. I want you to know what I'm giving you, and I'll look to see what you give me back. I would like to test San Pedro as it flows north and let Mexico know what that is. Because, you know, San Pedro is going to go all the way up to Wilcox, and they're going to have all the greenhouses up there growing, whatever they're growing in the greenhouses. I just want to make sure there isn't anything bad flowing north. In a perfect world, we test Santa Cruz as it flows north. And I think there's a gauging station 2 miles north of the Santa Cruz Pima County border in the Santa Cruz River. Whether that's the right place to test, I have no clue. But this would at least from my memory, the fifth management plan for the SCAMA said a lot of the aquifer gets depleted as it approaches Suarita because of the expansion of all the housing that's occurring there. Anybody that drives on I-19 now sees more houses. So, and then if John and his colleagues can talk to Mexico about what they might be doing in PFAS, just finding out, hey, if we're sending you anything, or you sending us anything on PFAS, you know, what is it that might be happening? Basically anything, to Sharon's point, anything that's flowing into the aquifer from no matter which side, you may want to encourage the sharing of the information. It doesn't have to be PFAS, it could be iron solids or whatever the right term is. And then probably more for Sharon's big meeting. Does Sonora have anything similar to our, I'll call them the AMA water regulations, that would help them monitor once they know where all the stuff is feeding? You know, what would that could help. So I'm a little exposed because Joaquin, Matt, I didn't know they were going to be here, so they can say I got it wrong, but I just wanted to voice that they're doing their things, but I saw some places where maybe cross border we can encourage stuff to happen. So that's all I had to say.
Well, thank you, John. I know Commissioner Henara is very interested in PFAS. So I believe there's going to be ongoing discussions within the agency. Funding is always an issue, but I think there's some things coming down the road from the commissioner. The commissioner is going to direct. Of course, we have to coordinate with Mexico, but so it is on our radar. It is something that we're concerned about as well. From a treatment plant standpoint, we're extremely concerned about it, and this is a nationwide issue, especially for wastewater treatment plants. As Jaime was saying, everything gets concentrated to the wastewater treatment plant, and then you have to do something with it. So it's not only the Nogales plant, it's every wastewater plant in the country is scrambling to try to find out what new technology is out there that can handle this, because you have two different waste streams. You have an effluent waste stream and you have a biosolids waste stream, and they're vastly different in how you handle those as far as treatment is concerned. So the industry right now is scrambling to try to figure out cost-effective ways of doing the treatment. There are ways of doing it, but it's extremely expensive right now. So we're very interested in it, and we're going to work through this as a whole, as a community to try to come up with the best solutions on it. So thank you, John. Is there any other board discussion? Yes, oh, I'm sorry, Bruce.
That's okay. Also Canyon, which really isn't a legal crossing point for sewage into the United States. What are we doing? What can we do? What can local government do? What can people do to
Sure.
advocate that we get the needed resources? I mean, it started off with like a trickle. It is way beyond a trickle, and it's like the wave is coming. They're
Right.
continuing to build houses in that area.
So that is a concern, and that is something that is being discussed, is the rapid expansion to the east from traditional Nogales, Sonora. The satellite treatment plants, there's been issues with them, the Puerto de Onza plant being one, equipment breakdowns, et cetera. ADQ generously donated an aeration blower motor and an aeration blower that has just recently been installed, so we should be seeing some improved water quality from there. But again, it's we're gonna have to move forward if there's gonna be any future of these satellite treatment plants, because as you said, right now, there's nothing in the treaty that really covers that. So I think we're gonna have to talk with Mexico about that and how we're going to regulate and monitor these crossings to make sure that they're meeting the water quality standards that we need, and we have some sort of mechanism if they're not, in order to go in there and try to get them to meet those standards. So that's where we're at currently with the Oso Wash issue right now. There's also some work being done by NADBank to improve some of the infrastructure in that area. And Joaquin, if you don't mind, you might have a little bit more on that.
Yeah, they're doing some diagnosis of what's needed in the Mexican side, just to go over some rehabilitation projects. But I wanted to add, just to mention that ADQ is also developing a project through USGS, Dr. Lauren Norman, to identify feasible sites on the US side that can be feasible to develop nature-based solutions, because we know the expansion that is and the growth that is happening on the east side in Nova Sonora, just to be proactive and mitigate whatever flows we are going to be receiving in the near future. So that's the one phase of a larger project that we envision to develop something on the US side to mitigate the containment of E. coli if that happens.
And did they finally get power to the pump station?
I can give an update on the pump station. So as most people in the local Santa Cruz County area know, there's been several events of fugitive sewage flows entering in the Nogales Wash, which then we call them transboundary fugitive flows, which enter the United States. So we have a team that's been working together. It's IBWC US, IBWC Mexico, ADQ, WMAPAS, various other agencies. And so we've been trying to decipher why these flows are occurring. And so the knowledge that we have right now is that the pump station was being rehabilitated by NADBank, the NADBank project. NADBank has essentially finished their rehabilitation effort, but there was some equipment testing that needed to occur. In conjunction with that, so the pump station had to be offline for that equipment testing to happen. In conjunction with that, a state agency for Sonora was repaving a street, a major thoroughfare right next to the pump station, and they were reconfiguring some of the wastewater collection system lines. So there was some events that occurred that were essentially uncontrolled events because they didn't have the proper equipment in order to handle those situations. So the latest that we have as of today is that the pump station, within 2 weeks the equipment should be checked out, fully capable of running. USIBWC is providing some equipment to the local utility through our counterparts in Mexico to assist the local utility to be able to contain those flows in a reasonable manner so they don't end up into the wash. So that's where we stay. That's where we stay right now. At the end of this, there's going to be vast improvement in the reliability of the pump station. They're putting in automated controls to control how much flow is going to go to their treatment plants. There's going to be a better network of collection system pipes in there that once the new pipes are installed, we shouldn't be seeing any of the random events like we've seen in the past.
So my follow-up question is, how much of this did you know in advance?
Not a lot. Not as much as I would have liked, right? So.
And IBWC is, not IBWC, and NADBank is funding some of this stuff. Is this something we could be talking to NADBank about? Like, they need to communicate with us? They need to be proactive?
I think I would agree with that. I think this has been a learning experience for all the agencies involved. And at the end of this, I think we're gonna have a more proactive approach to how we're doing things. We would have liked to have information before events occur. But I think it has improved the communication a little bit more. So sometimes you have to go through something like this in order to come out with something better. And I think that's where we're at. ADEQ is involved with us with the meetings as well. They're on top of it. So everybody is trying. I think that there's been an improvement, but it's lessons learned, and the communication is the key factor, right? Because once we know about it, we can offer technical assistance. We can do things. We notify our stakeholders as soon as we know about it through various forms. And so you can be prepared and you can respond to your residents and warn them as well. So we're a community that's separated by a border, so we should act as one community, right? And that's what we have to do. So
I can't thank IBWC and the work that you do, John, and ADQ and the communication we have with Joaquin. We'd be completely lost without it as a community. And so just thank you very much for all the efforts that you put forth. I mean, I hate to tell you, I call Joaquin more than I call you, John.
that's fine. That's fine. I've got a working phone now, so you might be able to get through to me.
Good, I'm gonna start calling you again. But no, I don't know if people understand how much work that these people, that Joaquin and John do in the community and how accessible they are to local leaders. And they just, if they don't know the answer, they figure it out and get back to us. And a lot of times they already have the answer. So thank you.
We do have Ben online that would like to ask a question. Go ahead, Ben. You have to unmute yourself.
I have two clarifications of what John Combo said. Brian and I were out there at Also Wash with Angela Gervasi from the Nogales International Wastewater. From the Nogales International newspaper. We did not sample. We observed and we smelled, and that was enough to know that it was still contaminated. The other clarification is the San Pedro runs to Winkleman, not Wilcox. So I think you meant Wilcox, John.
I wondered about that myself.
Thank you, Ben.
Okay, we have any other questions or comments? Okay, if not, future agenda items? Any suggestions?
I'm sorry, John, what did you say?
Future agenda
Future
items.
agenda items?
So for the board, the next meeting will be held, we're coming back around, so it'll be Santa Cruz County. So it'll be, back in the Nogales area.
So, some of us board members were looking at the, Border 2025 action plan update. And Brian asked a question, so I went to clarify it. I went back to Ms. Banos, who said, no, we're updating that. And copied Lorena Lopez Powers, who's the EPA coordinator. And she said, yes, for Arizona Sonora, it's going to be updated in March or April. And she said, California and Baja California won't even be started until later this year. But at least the Border 2025 action plan for Arizona Sonora is supposed to be updated within, basically 6 weeks. So if you wanted to have an update on the Border 2025, I would maybe call Claudia Hield, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing her name. I'm using the Spanish pronunciation, but she's ADEQ. She's the task force co-chair for the US side. There's an EPA counterpart to her who has a Southern California telephone number. But maybe we could ask Claudia to just, instead of going to her office downtown in Tucson, just go down I-19 to Tubac or Nogales and ask NADB to come and talk with the update. Because one of the items, and I think Joaquin mentioned this, is, I'm not sure he phrased it this way, but apparently there is a pilot project plan for Cerro Pelon and Oso Wash that's part of this Border 2025 action plan for Arizona Sonora. Claudia only, I shouldn't say only, has responsibility for goal 2 of the Border 2025 action plan, which is just improve water quality. So it would be focused on improved water quality for the Arizona region. It would go all the way over to Naco, cover Naco, et cetera, for their plans. And then if John had any success with his testing, we could talk about that. Especially if they were able to find out from their colleagues on the other side of the border what might be happening about PFAS or any enhanced water regulations that might exist over there, like the AMAs do over here. And I'll wait for Sharon to spring the surprise when they have the final transpounder aquifer study per se. But that would be a separate thing. So that would be my suggestion, that you could consider having update, NADB and Claudia come down and talk about, and just focus it on water. We don't probably need, I shouldn't say we don't need, but there's air, there's solid materials, there's all different goals as part of that border plan, but I'd focus it on the water side.
I just want to mention that there are plans that the next task force meeting with EPA and Arizona and Sonora for Border 2025 is going to be held on June, sometime in June, in Nogales, Sonora. So those are the plans.
Is that a public meeting?
It's a public meeting, yeah. And we'll have the water task force led by Claudia, who is online, I think.
Okay.
Yes, Joaquin. I am online.
So you got an action item, Claudia.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have a concern. A few years ago, there was a lot of momentum behind the stormwater that was coming into the US from Mexico. It was my understanding that got handed off to Sonoran Institute. I was talking casually at another meeting to somebody from Sonoran Institute. They didn't understand it that way, which is interesting to me because it would explain why no progress has been made in the last year and a half, 2 years. But I think it's a critical thing that we start addressing again. Santa Cruz County is about to spend $14 million on a retention basin in Ephraim Canyon, which is a canyon just below the port of entry. But we also have to figure out how to slow water down coming through the Nogales Wash. And that's a binational issue, and we gotta do this. We have great studies. We have a LiDAR study of Nogales, Sonora. We recently were able to lower the flood level in downtown Nogales by 25% because of that. So there are actionable things that we can do to help the residents in Nogales, Arizona, and even Nogales, Sonora, because they're the ones perishing, literally perishing, because they don't have the flood control basins that they need. And we could probably spend about $2 million in Nogales, Sonora to do what we're doing in Ephraim Canyon, spending 14+ million and get the same result. So these projects in Mexico, if we do them, then of course we have the same issues, like they have to be done and then we have to maintain them. So we literally have to be on top of them to make sure this stuff gets maintained. Otherwise, we end up with a pumping station that doesn't work, or a sewage system treatment that needs blower motors, but we don't know about it until 4 months later. But if we're actively helping them manage their system, then we know it will work for us. So I'd like to, try to somehow start addressing these basins again.
Thank you. Have that noted. Anything else for now? And if you all think of anything else, you can always send me an email. And points of contact would be very helpful.
So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I know we ran a little bit late, and I want to thank all the people that joined us online. I think we had a fantastic discussion tonight, and thank Dr. Randall and Mr. Naylor. And I think it's fantastic, and everybody have a good night. And Leslie will send out information about meetings locations for the next meeting, and we'll continue working on suggested topics for presentations.
Yes.
But thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Leslie, is it possible to get, or should I use you, to get the names of the members?
I can send the board members. Yeah, I can send it to you.
Yeah, okay. That's totally good.